so very much for allowing me to share with you this morning. I was very surprised and felt honored and humble when I was asked to speak. Since we've only been at St. Joseph since last August, I knew there were some long-term residents who might have been better suited to speaking than me. If you notice me reading from my notes this morning, I apologize because my memorization skills have kind of diminished over the years. And after all, I'm almost 79, so I'm entitled. Just a little history. When I was 2 years old, my father was killed in an auto accident. And my mother placed me and my 2 older brothers in an orphanage when I was going on age 4, where I lived until I graduated from high school at age 17. There isn't enough time this morning to tell you about all the things that happened during those years, but I will read part of the synopsis on the back cover of my book to just explain a little bit. When she was 6 years old, June began taking summer-long trips to stay with her grandparents, during which time she was sexually molested by her grandfather. And as if that wasn't enough, she had to further endure psychological and verbal abuse in the orphanage at the cruel hands of her house mother and the matron. Broken No More, a true story of hope in the dark, is June's powerful story of heartache and pain through abuse, and ultimate joy as she comes face to face with her Savior. Well, when I was 13 in the orphanage, I was always a very quiet child, but when I was 13 in the orphanage, our new house mother asked one night to take her girls to a local Baptist church that was showing Christian movies on Saturday nights. And again, I will read a little something from the book. After a few weeks of attending the movies, it was getting close to Easter, and the film that night was about the life, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus. As I was watching, the scene portrayed Jesus nailed to the cross. Well, I knew it was just a movie with actors, but the camera showed a close-up of the face of the actor, and his eyes seemed to be burning right into my heart. And it was at that point in my life that my heart really broke. I realized Jesus was on that cross for me. That night, God reached down with a lifeline that he knew I was going to need in the years to come. And he gathered me up in his arms where I found sanctuary, where he would keep me safe and secure, and he never abandoned me. And I was telling Deb this morning that as I was preparing this speech, Trinity Senior Living Communities, I was thinking of a little bit different name. Trinity Super Loving Communities. Now, when my husband Bob and I married almost 60 years ago, well, not almost, 60 years ago this October, I remember asking him if he would still love me when I was old and gray and couldn't take care of myself. Well, when I asked that, I was 19 years old, and I really had no idea what being old and gray meant. And I was so in love with my handsome husband that I couldn't depart beyond the year 1954, just knowing that our future years together would be idyllic. Boy, have I been surprised. Now, I don't know how those 60 years have gone by so fast. It just seems like yesterday that we were standing in front of that preacher, promising to love each other unconditionally until death parted us. So excuse me if I'm hoarse. I have a sinus problem and it drains. Well, when I look at Bob today, I can see in him, in my mind's eye, the tall, handsome young man that I fell in love with and married. but I sometimes wonder what he sees when he looks at me. I know the mirror doesn't lie. It just reflects reality. And 29 years ago, when I turned 50, I wrote this poem. Could someone bring me a drink of water? That's not the poem. I look in the mirror and all that I see is a face that says, how could anyone love me? An hourglass figure. It seems to appear that the sand is all shifted around to the rear. The chin I was born with is turned into 3. I find it hard to believe that this really is me. Is this what appears to the people I know? Do all my imperfections so blatantly show? That my family and friends love me, I don't have to fear. Even though it's my half-century birthday this year, boy, did that make me feel old. My neighbor came over and said, you're a jewel for taking care of her son after school. And this morning my grandson called while I was alone and said, I love you, Grandma, as he hung up the phone. When I'm feeling so blue or wound up too tight, my husband will say, you look nice tonight. All physical imperfections the mirror can't hide, but it sure doesn't show all the good feelings inside. So now when I look, I'm pleased when I see that the mirror is hiding the real, lovable me. Now, for those of you here today who work at the sanctuaries or have a professional or voluntary connection with them, when you look at the seniors who live there, what do you see? That bent-over old man with a cane, did you know that he was a colonel in the Air Force and he flew a bomber during World War II? How about that quiet little lady who sits in her wheelchair every day looking out the window, waiting for her husband who's been dead for 6 years to come for her? Or this sweet old man whose wife has dementia, as he gently holds her hand and leads her to the dining room or to the special programs each day. Did you know that frail, wrinkled, little old woman who endures excruciating pain from rheumatoid arthritis was once a gifted ballerina? And the grumpy old man whose children only visit him on Christmas or his birthday. Did he become so grumpy because his children neglect him, or do his children neglect him because he's so grumpy? So again, what do you see? Can you just visualize the wealth of wisdom that can be found stored in our aged minds? And can you see past the wrinkles and visualize the young, strong bodies that once resided within us? Well, if you're like the folks who work at the St. Joseph Sanctuary, you do know these answers. I constantly hear the staff asking a resident as they pass in the hall, Susan, how is your daughter doing? Has she recovered from that accident yet? Or Howard, how's that new great-grandbaby? I marvel at how they can remember those things because there's so many residents there. But you'll never really know how truly good it makes us feel when you remember personal things about us. It shows you care about us and we're not just the residents in apartment 311. Now my husband and I took kind of a roundabout way to get to St. Joseph Sanctuary, and I'll just share some of it with you. Bob and I moved from New Jersey to Ann Arbor in 1972. And when he finally retired, we decided, or rather I did, that 25 winters was all I could take. So we moved to Florida in 1997, and we purchased a beautiful 4-bedroom home with a screened-in swimming pool while we were there. But 11 years later, that house and yard was just, so we moved to a beautiful retirement facility about 7 miles from our home. But shortly after we moved there, Bob was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. And it hit him very quickly. He was the typical picture of a Parkinson's patient. Difficulty walking, falling, stumbling. But under the care of a top Orlando neurologist, the right pills, and a lot of prayer from our family and friends, and especially from our church family, you wouldn't have known that he had Parkinson's. He looked and walked perfectly normal. He didn't need to use a cane or a walker. Well, last March, I had sinus and deviated septum surgery in Florida, and my recovery was extremely painful with some complications. I couldn't function normally, so Bob was my caregiver. However, being a fairly typical man, he had trouble operating the can opener. And he wasn't quite sure what to do with a can of condensed Campbell's soup. So I knew it was time to move back to Michigan to be closer to our children, especially because I knew there were going to be hard decisions I would have to make in the years to come, and I wanted to be closer to them so they could help me. So we moved in May of last year back to Michigan and moved into a beautiful retirement place in Canton, Michigan. However, from the first day there, we discovered the food was terrible. My husband had lost over 40 pounds before we left Florida just suddenly. And here at the new place, because the food was so bad, he was just picking at his food. He wasn't eating at all. And I was really beginning to worry about him. And every night, at least one of the companions at our dinner table would complain about the food and tell us they'd been complaining for about a year, and no one listened to them, just ignored. So I thought I would take things into my own hands and I would try to make things better. So I decided to ask for a meeting with the chef and the executive director. I voiced my concerns and the complaints and concerns of the other residents, but nothing came of that. I explained the food was tasteless, was overcooked, and it was of poor quality. But the cook's answer to that was that old folks like bland food. So that meeting was in vain. Then I decided to go another route. I wrote a 3-page letter to the executive staff, sent a copy to the parent company who owned the organization. I sent a copy to the state senator, and I sent a copy to the Michigan Seniors Affairs Bureau. But nothing came of that. Well, one night when our server brought my dinner, I looked at it, tasted it, and asked the server to please take this back to the kitchen and tell the cook it was unacceptable. The server came back to me, said he had told the cook, and the cook's response was, "I don't give a damn." I was furious. I don't remember ever being so mad before in my life. One of the cooks came to the table and tried to talk to me, but I told him I couldn't talk. I was too upset. So I left the dining room, and about 30 minutes later, I was taken by ambulance to the hospital with a stress-induced heart attack. Well, 3 days later, when I left the hospital, my oldest son and I went to the executive director. Now, we had signed a year's unbreakable lease when we moved in. So I told her that I had no plans of suing, but if they did not allow us to break that lease, we were going to sue. So she told me to give them 30 days notice. So we did, and we moved to the sanctuary at St. Joseph, but not before we tasted one of their meals. And my husband cleaned his plate every night. Now, good, tasteful food, as you all know, is very important to everyone, but especially to seniors. As we get older, sometimes our appetites are not as large, so the food that we eat should be nourishing and should be tasty. The kitchen staff at the sanctuary sure know how to cook. The fresh salad bar is excellent. The breads are freshly baked for dinner. Soups are homemade. and the entrees are nicely seasoned, with the exception of sometimes too much lemon on the fish. And I can't pass up the desserts. The servers are also exceptional. It's so nice to have those young people around us all the time. Most of them are college students, but they're polite and they're caring and they're very helpful. Now, my husband's Parkinson's is progressing at a very rapid rate right now. The message from his mind to his feet just doesn't connect, and his feet and legs won't often move. But the VA just recently gave him a new state-of-the-art walker, specially made for Parkinson's people. It has a laser beam that, as long as his toes are passing under the laser beam, he knows he's in the right spot and helped him walk. But it doesn't always help, so he's been in a wheelchair most of the time lately. However, he can get around by himself. He goes down to fitness, he goes to the exercise, goes to some of the programs, and I can stay in the apartment and do my own thing because I know that the staff and the other residents are looking out for him for me. A couple of the times when I've not been with him, he's fallen, and I've heard about it because at least 10 people tell me. Even though we're in the independent living quarters, when I have a problem, it's immediately taken care of. Whether it is no heat in our apartment during one of the coldest days this past winter, or needing help to clean up broken glass on the carpet, which Annie, our cleaning lady, who has become a very good friend, immediately vacuumed up. The entire staff, too many to name, from maintenance, cleaning, clerical, nursing, you name it, they're good friends. They're not employees, they're good friends, part of our family, who willingly help us in every way possible. There is one other person I will name though. Marianne Danks, the village chaplain, is a real sweetheart. And I sometimes suspect that she's one of God's angels masquerading as a human. Well, you who are here have all been blessed by God with gifts. And He's given you an extra measure of patience, kindness, gentleness, and a huge capacity to love. You're willing to sit and talk with us whenever we need it, or just listen. You show respect, make us feel that we're still important, even if it's only in our own minds. And I believe you all know that a personal conversation, a simple smile, a hug, or even just greeting us by name as we pass through the halls can make our day. They make a big difference in our day. I've jokingly said that old age should come with a manual. Unfortunately, it hasn't. And I've told my husband that I began life in an institution and I'm ending it up in one. But I know we found sanctuary when we arrived at St. Joseph. So I urge you all, keep up the good work. Remember, you're God's arms and legs here on these little bits of earth called sanctuaries. And you're providing a safe and a loving environment, an encouraging environment for those of us who are in their sunset years. And you might not know it, but you're going to be there someday too. And when we retired, I said I was not going to just sit home and vegetate. God still had work for me to do, and as long as I have breath in my body, which seems to be slowly leaving me, I will continue to serve Him. And I would like to leave you with this verse. Perhaps you can also adopt it as a verse as you all start getting older. Oh God, you have taught me from my earliest childhood, and I have constantly told others about the wonderful things you do. Now that I am old and gray, do not abandon me, O God. Let me proclaim your power to this new generation, your mighty miracles to all who come after me. Thank you.